Welcome back, everyone. It's Andy Deyell back with another episode of Conversations with Canisius. I have a very special guest today. We are joined all the way from Philadelphia by Zoltan Kerekes from the class of 1983. Zoltan is the co-founder of PIPV Ventures, and I hope I said that right, Zoltan.
PIPV Capital. And hello.
PIPV Capital. Okay. And tell us a little bit as we get started today. First of all, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Andy.
And tell us a little bit about what PIPV Capital does and sort of how you got into that line of work.
PIPV Capital is a private equity firm that I co-founded back in 2004 in Philadelphia with two partners. We have been very active in the pharmaceuticals business. Essentially, we've done a number of investments on the early side of pharmaceuticals in terms of pre-marketed drugs and compounds. And we've also done a fair amount of work on the sort of other side of pharmaceuticals, which is off-patent branded drugs. And the type of work is really we buy these products or we acquire these products from the large pharmas, and we create our own standalone new companies using those. So that has been my business with some side things, shall we say, for the past 16, 17 years.
Great. And you know, I've had the benefit of talking to you before, and I know a little bit about your story, and it's a really, really cool story. So we're going to circle back to like what you do now, but let's go back in time a little bit and tell us a little bit about how you came to not only Canisius High School, but how you came to the United States, how you came to Buffalo, and sort of take us through your journey for high school, the ups and downs of being a new kid in a new country at a new school.
Well, that will take us by quite a few years. You know, look, I was born and raised in a small village. And when I mean small village, I mean small village in Transylvania. So dirt roads, no running water. And again, not because of people wanted rustic environments. That's all there was.
Sure.
So I was born there. I was fortunate enough to move to the United States in 1980. So I'm fresh off the plane, as they would say. Moved to Buffalo. My father had a small parish. He was a Protestant minister in Buffalo. So when we moved, my sister and I, we moved to be with him. This was, again, 1980. And then I think I was lucky enough to get enrolled at Canisius in that year. I should mention I never did my first year of high school because when I left Romania, I had to drop out of high school. I had to take care of a number of things. This was under hardcore communism, so Ceausescu was a dictator. And when they found out, or when they learned that I was leaving the country, I was essentially kicked out of school. And also had to do a bunch of things to allow me to leave and to get my exit visa. So by the time I arrived in Buffalo and to Canisius, my freshman year was gone. I did not speak the language, and previously I'd attended, co-ed schools. So being at Canisius, again from Romania, from a small village, and not speaking the language had its own challenges. But I have to say, look, the school was extremely welcoming to me, and they allowed me the time to sort of settle in, pick up enough language skills, where then I was allowed to start my sophomore year that fall of 1980. So that's how my life, I should say, started in Buffalo, New York, and Canisius.
And how did you find your time at your 4 years at Canisius? What are some of the takeaways that you have from that time? Or sorry, not your 4 years, your 3 years, really.
3 years. My takeaway, I was trying to sort of fit it. I was trying to learn the language. I was trying to understand the culture, not only of a new country, but also the culture of of a Jesuit high school that was, a boys' school. Um, I didn't really have time to play sports, and nor did I really know how to get into them. If I played sports back in Romania, it was soccer and handball, so not really sports that one normally associates with the U.S.
Right.
And again, I was trying to learn the language, and I was trying to pass my classes and do well enough that I could go to college. So the 3 years passed relatively quickly. Overall, it was a great experience. I mean, it was being able to adjust and being able to learn and be given that opportunity was really crucial for me. And Canisius did that for me.
Great. And how did it, so 3 years go by, like you said, quickly, and you find yourself at Fordham University, where I believe you went as an undergrad, and it was another formative sort of part of your journey. So take us through your time at Fordham and into your early career, and speak a little bit about how Canisius prepared you for that.
So the Jesuits prepared me for it, and they kind of walked me through it even through undergrad. I think the education that I received at Canisius was excellent. I mean, look, I managed to do okay, even in high school, even without having the proper, even English being my third language. So I managed to get through it. I managed to do well enough, and I learned a lot, which was fantastic. So then I moved to Fordham University for undergrad, and I was kind of shepherded through by another Jesuit, John Adam, who was a Hungarian Jesuit, who was a professor at Fordham. And he kind of took me under his wing. So my Jesuit education and mentorship sort of continued nicely throughout my years at Fordham as well. I was pre-med in undergrad. Again, my thought was that sciences are the universal language, which would be an easier way for me to progress through undergrad and then eventually go to med school. And I was pre-med. I finished with a major in biology. I was BS at Fordham. But then I realized, while still in undergrad, that medicine was really not for me. I was diagnosed a few years ago with what is it called? White lab coat syndrome. So essentially, if I go see a doctor, if I call a doctor, my blood pressure shoots through the roof. So medicine was not going to be my profession.
Yeah.
Then I switched to law. I took my LSATs and ended up at Boston University for law school, which is where I graduated from in 1990. Subsequent to law school, then I ended up in New York City. I worked at a boutique law firm called Habgut Kalimavde, which did patent litigation for some of the large pharmaceutical companies. Then 2 years after that, I was recruited by one of the large New York law firms, actually global law firms, called White & Case. And I practiced intellectual property litigation at White & Case, generally also focused on pharmaceutical company litigation. And then when my wife and I decided that we wanted to start a family, I left New York. We left New York. I left White & Case and went in-house to SmithKline Beecher. So you can sort of see a pattern of pharma, which kind of follows through my career and then eventually goes into my private equity business that I'm doing today.
And how did your time at Canisius sort of prepare you for what you're doing today? Can you point to any, lessons you learned or direct influences that helped you out?
There is a fundamental decency, I think, to the Jesuit order, a decency and a humanity, an ability to be open, to treat people with respect, to have some faith in yourself. I think, and this came also through my mentorship with Father Adam. Growing up in a world that throws many things at you. In my case, it was more of a different nature, but it happens to everyone. Where you create walls, you perhaps shield yourself from various things in life. It's always helpful to have some introspection, to be able to examine your humanity, to examine your empathies, your strengths, weaknesses, and really try and understand why you do things that you do. So what it allowed me to do is, again, have that sort of a self-examination journey, if you will, where you can look at what you're doing. I mean, look, being born in a small village and moving to private equity or even to White & Case was a big step. I mean, I was with attorneys and who have lived their lives in the US, or who have had parents who are lawyers at other large firms, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it was a step, and there was a level of self-examination. How exactly do you fit in, and what are you doing here? Same thing with the private equity world. You know, it's somewhat of a rarefied atmosphere in terms of who gets to do that stuff. So I think my Jesuit education helped me with that, and I think Canisius started me on that journey. And again, just understanding the basics and looking at who I am, what I am, why am I doing things, or why am I not doing things. So that's perhaps kind of a not as elegant way of what I have describing what I have what I have gone through because of what started at Canisius.
That's great. That's great. So if you know, ideally, this video will reach the eyes and ears of our young alums who are just, you know, either graduating from Canisius, heading to college, leaving college, heading out to start their career in the world. Thinking about sort of the lessons you've learned as you've, you know, gone along through not only your career but through your school time and your time as a sort of newly resettled immigrant. What kind of, because Buffalo, as you may or may not know, is becoming a destination for large immigrant populations, you know, and it's not only is it enriching the fabric of the city, those students are reaching Canisius High School, and those students are enriching the fabric of our great school. And so, as you think about advice you could give to young people today, and you know, on several different levels, what kind of wisdom would you impart into young people as they're about to make their way in the world?
Well, look, I still view the United States as a land of opportunity. It really is. But it is not an easy land of opportunity, especially for immigrants. That said, I think if one is fortunate enough to end up at a school like Canisius that sort of embraces you and gives you a chance to learn, number one. Number two, to really understand yourself and deal with some of the issues that inevitably we all deal with. It can help you start on a path that's a very positive path. Again, it's not easy, but it's one of those cornerstones that I think I would hope all of us would have as an opportunity to start with. And we all know most people do not. You know, to be at an elite high school that is caring, that is not afraid to embrace, let's say, an immigrant, and not afraid and does not shy away from dealing with some of the issues that are not necessarily commonplace if you look at the general population of the school, is a huge plus. In terms of advice, I mean, look, I think from my perspective, embrace the opportunities. Always be a person of your word. Always be introspective. Always examine as to what exactly, if you do certain things, why are you doing certain things? Have empathy. The world is not an easy place. And I think I'm sure that if you look at the Jesuit faculty and the Jesuit order overall, there's a tremendous amount of empathy in them, because that's what it means to be a proper priest, someone who administers not only wisdom, but also provides sort of a spiritual element to things. And you need that as a fundamental building block for your life. You need to look at opportunities. You always need to embrace opportunities. It is daunting many times to, again, start a new school, start a new career, especially if you don't have the pedigree that prepares you for it. So if your background is different from your normal Wall Street banker, you need to be able to sort of rise to the occasion and sort of not be afraid to go in and contribute what you can. I think often people are stopped by these sort of mental blocks of, am I good enough? Can I do this? Etc. One of the things that I believe Canisius can do and has done is to unblock some of those stoppers that frankly contribute to a life that is not living up to the full potential.
Great, great. So I know your role as managing partner at PIPV Capital takes a lot of your time, but you mentioned a little bit early some side projects, and you know, you and I have talked. You have another project that you're working on now. Talk a little bit about the future for Zoltan Kerekes and what you're working on, and some of the other things that occupy your time.
So the things that occupy my time now, about 4 years ago, we entered into the medical cannabis space with my current partners, my 3 PIPV partners, as well as 2 PIPV partners, as well as some other partners that I have asked to join. And we started with a so-called super license in Pennsylvania, which we were fortunate enough to win, that allowed us to build a company that grew cannabis, processed it, and sold it, and is selling it in Pennsylvania. In about 3 years' time, we managed to get to the point where we were supplying 20% of the medical cannabis market in Pennsylvania. So it's a very successful company. It's called Ilera Healthcare. And I mean, it's interesting, you know, when you think of an immigrant from Romania who got into medical cannabis, you know, given the sort of no tolerance to cannabis when I was growing up,
right?
It was even worse than in the U.S. I mean, literally, you would be killed if you were caught distributing cannabis. So I did not grow up with it, but honestly, having done enough research and being open to what it is and what it isn't, it was an interesting business to get into. But anyway, so the Pennsylvania business was something that I started about 4 years ago. And then from then we entered into another state. We're in Louisiana as well, one of our companies. And we also partnered up sort of the pure pharmaceutical angle of cannabis with a publicly traded company out of Australia called Zelda. So that new merged company is now called Zelira, Z-E-L-I-R-A, and it's trading on the Australian Stock Exchange as well as OTC in the US. So those are sort of cannabis ventures right now. Then more recently, strictly on the PIPV Capital side, on the pharmaceutical side, we just, I guess the term is, we just closed on a deal where we sponsored, my 2 partners and I sponsored a so-called SPAC, S-P-A-C, so a Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation company, where the goal is to acquire branded medicines from large pharmas. So these are prescription medicines. So think Lipitor, you know, where Pfizer creates a drug, it sells it under patent protection for a number of years, making blockbuster-sized money. In the case of Lipitor, I think Pfizer's were making $13.6 billion a year from Lipitor. But eventually that ends because the patents expire and the drugs sort of become off patent. And at that stage, generics come in and they take over most of the market. But what is interesting is sort of 5 to 10% of the market still remains with the brand. We always talk about Bayer aspirin, you know, as an example, because if if you trace back Bayer aspirin's history, the patents on it expired about 100 years ago. But Bayer, the company, still made over $1 billion from selling aspirin last year. So the brands themselves stay powerful, you know, and the same is true for brands that you can think of, even consumer brands, you know, Puma, for example. I mean, when I was in high school, no one would have been caught dead wearing Puma, right? That was not cool. Today it's cool again, you know, and I think it's second only to Nike, and because people, you know, remember brands and they use brands. So that concept is what fuels our new SPAC, and this is something we've done in the past. We built other companies around these off-patent branded drugs. But the goal is to buy some medicines from the large pharmas on a global level, which we then use the proceeds from the SPAC to then create that company that will continue selling these drugs on a global level. So that's kind of keeping me busy these days.
That's a lot. That's a lot. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Zoltan, for these few minutes so we can catch up. We really look forward to keeping in touch and hearing about all your new projects. I know you're going to be featured in the CHSTA magazine coming up in the spring issue, so people have plenty of opportunity to learn a little bit more about you and your amazing story and your amazing success. So thanks for joining us today. Best wishes, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, Andy. And thank you again, and please convey my best, and thanks again to the Jesuits.
Cheers. See you soon.
Take care. Take care.
Bye.